On our journey through life, we have to entertain ourselves. I think we tell ourselves stories and we live out of goals we set for ourselves, challenges, notions of an imagination. And I don't think that we can really become our fullest selves if we don't get outside ourselves to dream, essentially. And that leads us to our sermon. And I think they're just, stories are really just dreamy ways that we can kind of present challenges to ourselves and our imaginations in a way that's not quite so pragmatic and gives us a little bit of lift. And I think there's no better example of the modern myth than The Wizard of Oz, which we'll talk about a little bit. And in other films too. And The Wizard of Oz deals with these timeless themes of wandering and homecoming and exile and return and growth. And I think it's particularly cool because before its time, it had a female protagonist, that had that twist, right? There wasn't a lot of female protagonists back then. UU Minister Gary Kowalski says that the tale keeps getting repeated as if we can't put it down. And I think that's true of all sort of historic journeys. And that's certainly true of The Wizard of Oz. I remember being a kid, and I guess it was on every year, right? I'm partially sharing this, not because it's any particular timeliness, but I discovered that The Wizard of Oz was released basically a month after my mother was born. So it has certain kind of a poignancy for me now. And I remember sitting outside. I could never watch it. I was tantalized. I was mesmerized by the fact that it was on for, I don't know, probably a 2 or 3 year period of time. I was probably 7, I guess. And I would go next door at least for a couple of years, and I would watch through the window at my neighbor's, which was also my aunt's house, so no one called the police. And through the bushes, and I could that was the distance I needed from the witch to feel somewhat safe, and I couldn't quite bear to watch the whole film straight up. I had to kind of run away. I don't think I've ever seen it straight through, actually. But it was built on a popular book by Frank Baum, and like so many films, it was given a green light, probably because it had this popularity going into the film, and it wasn't expected to be what it became, and it was initially at least a bit of a flop. But the film in Technicolor kind of captured people's attentions over time, and it's now thought of as one of the top 10 films of all time by the American Film Institute, and certainly in terms of its popularity. So the natural place to begin a sermon that's at least a little bit about this is to be, in a dull farmhouse in Kansas, or you could maybe even start this sermon in a cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, or for effect, you could imagine yourself in some cold Philly meat locker, Rocky pounding on those big steers that are hanging up there. But I think we'll start with a Swede named Carl Jung, who was one of the early voices in the field of psychotherapy. And he came to believe that our psyches, in fact, the psyches of all humans across all time, really kind of share not only the combination of nerves and brains that we sort of know that they do, but his contribution was the idea that we would had sort of this psychic software inside our heads, right? Archetypes are a part of what he shared. And he came to believe that humans were hardwired more or less with a few primitive ideas and drives and even symbols that were true across time. Horses being symbols of our wildness, right? The sort of animus. And he had a whole sort of series of things. He wouldn't have used the notion of software or hardwiring, but I think it's somewhat fitting to the way we think of ourselves now. And one of the serious themes for Jung is this idea of the hero's journey. And we always identify with heroes. You can't almost watch a film like Star Wars and not identify with Luke, right? I mean, you might identify with Leia if you're a woman, but for the most part, it's hard not to identify with Dorothy, male or female, and Katniss in the Hunger Games, and, these characters like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, and Rocky, and Luke, and 1,000 others, and these people always have these tragic flaws, right? And they're just like us because they're sort of built a certain way, and they have tragic weaknesses in them, just like we do, and they have to grow, right? They have to grow past those weaknesses and through them. And I think that's what makes these stories resonate, is something happens in film and in story that draw us in at the perfect distance, right? That's what art to a certain degree does. It allows you to be you in some kind of way that changes you. I say it better here, but I don't want to read too much. Now, Jung's work is thought to have been sexist, and there's some other folks like Maureen Murdoch, who did A Heroine's Journey, if anyone's looking for some alternative. But where we are culturally always is going to affect how that hero's journey is told and what's important. And if you think about The Wizard of Oz, it was just after the Dust Bowl. It was 1939, right? The Depression was not very far behind us, maybe even still on, depending on how you want to talk about it. And it's set in this farmhouse in Kansas. Today, when you think about the stories that are being told, I'm just going to come up with a list. And I just sort of thought we're into a phase where the kind of, with ADHD and Asperger's and sort of the new knowledge about the kind of funky ways different people think coming to the fore. Just listen to this list. Monk. House, if you watch television at all. The new Watson. The cast of Scorpion. Dexter, who's a serial killer turned cop. The Blacklist, which is this megalomaniac kind of brilliant guy. In A Beautiful Mind are some of those. So I think we're on to this kind of phase where we're seeing that kind of journey of how individual our minds work. But if you take the 20th century, like some of the greatest films, Dorothy from Oz, Luke from Star Wars, Rocky from Philly, they capture our attention because they make us be better selves. And they're all yet in different ways. They all go on a similar journey, right? That there's this call inside of them that eats at them, right? They're all found at home initially in their original contexts, right? They're all where they're from. Dorothy is home on the farm. And then they receive a calling. And there's this kind of general arc of this hero's journey as told by Jung and by, Joseph Campbell and other places. So you're found at home. There's a call that's generally resisted. There's some kind of compelling call. And then there's another call. She, of course, is in boring gray Kansas and then, is lifted up by a tornado, taken to a technicolor land. And then what does she want to do? All she wants to do is go home, right? And Rocky is sort of another kind of more of a personal journey. He doesn't leave his geographic area very much, but Luke does. Luke is found in this sparse desert town, not unlike Kansas, but on another planet, and he's stuck with his uncle. His parents are gone. And they always find a mentor, right? There's a mentor that pulls them into a new you. And I simply just want you, you can listen, but I also want you to think about the journey you're on and have been on and the places that you've taken and where you haven't gone and where you might go. So as the hero's journey often goes, they find these protective figures. Skywalker finds Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Dorothy meets Glinda the Witch. Rocky finds the scrappy trainer and then also seems to fall in his sort of clumsy relationship with Adrian. Gets that off the ground. And they walk with them on this journey and they help them and they realize there's always something magical about it too, right? There's always iconic images. Dorothy has on her feet these magical slippers that she comes to believe protect her and sort of guide her. Luke has the Force, right, which he finds out from Obi-Wan is kind of genetically in him given his heritage. And Rocky just simply uses his kind of hard scrabble, right, toughness to sort of rise above and use the opportunity presented to him. We almost always greet the hero in the ordinary world. Buddha is met in his own sort of wealthy little cocoon of life, protected. Jesus you meet as a carpenter before he becomes, right, he's a baby, then he's the carpenter. You have to start there or the journey isn't true, right? Superman isn't Superman unless we see him come from another planet. Superman isn't Superman without kryptonite to bring him back down to his knees. And there's always that before photograph. So I want you to just imagine in your mind, whether it's in the past or now, it's up to you. You can, but there's the you that needs transformation. And who hasn't initially refused their call or wanted their call of what they're destined to be to go away? We all have. Dorothy gets what scholars of the hero's journey call the call to adventure by, first having Toto being in danger and having someone get sick, but then she's off to the Technicolor land and she finds munchkins and witches floating in bubbles, and she's sent on her journey with Glenda down the road to stay on that journey and to be committed to it. In the classical understanding of the hero's journey, taking those few first steps is, always ill-fitting. And at the end, they all return back to home, right? They return back to the selves that they were, but always in a new way. The plot line for Dorothy is probably ingrained in all your minds, but she meets a number of allies along the way, and she teaches them too, right? She teaches, in the end, the Tin Man and the Lion and that they all have heart and courage and intelligence that they didn't otherwise see. And she realizes that she has fortitude, and she realizes, I don't know if she quite realizes it, but what we realize is that she has wanted to dream her way to a new you, right? Somewhere over the rainbow. She wants that in an easy way. And she doesn't get it because we almost never get it in an easy way, right? You never get to play the piano like that, or even like Bev does, without oodles of time and failure. And you don't get to play like Brooke Williams until you've had a guitar in your hand, as I said to Mark, for 45 years of your life, So we always wish for something to come easily, and we almost never get it that way. And we have nemesis along the way, right? We have our own fears, and then we have real challenges that present ourselves. Dorothy is the witch. And often in these stories, it is the most basic things that bring us down or lift us up. The Wicked Witch is brought down by water, thrown by Dorothy to try to save her friend the Scarecrow from burning. It's her act of love that brings down the great nemesis, right? And for all of us, most of the time, it is those basic staples like courage and love and facing the challenges like ALS head on that make us the people that we are. So the wizard is a classic caricature of those who try to fake their way to success, right? He's becomes this bumbling kind of person who we realize is not who he has wanted to be. And only at the end, when the wizard actually uses his technical skills as a balloonist, funny enough, does he never really helps her get home, but he actually kind of comes to his own greater awareness when he's been exposed from behind the curtain. Everyone has a different journey, whether it's fighting addiction, whether it's fear, whether it's physical challenges. We all miss something. As Scott Taylor, who's a UU minister out in Rochester, says, it's difficult to say what any of us are missing, or it's always difficult for us to say almost really what we need until we go off on a journey to find ourselves. And that is the trouble with spiritual yearning, he says. Half the job is figuring out what you're after. Gary Kowalski says in his sermon, Not Very Good Wizards, and that Dorothy is a complex hero for the late 30s. And this is interesting to us as UUs, because he chooses her or writes her into that story in part because he married a woman's rights advocate. He married the daughter of one of those that ran around with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Her name was Matilda Gage, and she helped found the National Women's Suffragist Association. And he chose a female character in part because he was sort of immersed in that world. I want you to think for just a minute, and I'll go on a little bit of a poetic journey here. You can close your eyes for this. It might be helpful. We are all on a religious journey, whether one defines it that way or not. We are pilgrims through different stages of our lives. We adapt to challenges that face us, or we flee from them. Probably both. We can choose to live as if we were pursuing the Minotaur, or walk right by the famed sword in the stone without caring for a pull. That is up to us. And that choice, how seriously, how mythically or not, you approach life will often not really be challenged. Whether you accept or direct yourself on what might be your mythic journey is really up to you. Very few people will get in the way, when that's just a practical observation. Really only your parents, maybe your closest friends, maybe your kids will care enough to tell you that it's time for you to close your eyes and use the Force and walk down whatever golden road you need to walk down or not. We're all given that choice. I hope to some degree we all rise to the occasion, take a pull on the sword, and try to become a better us. Amen. Please join me for our closing hymn, 298. Wake now our senses, 298.